You really thought those properties were still yours after you signed everything over to Rico, Furley? From today on, you don't have a single asset left in your name. That sentence was said in a calm, almost bored voice by my own attorney. 2 years later, that same man's hands were shaking in front of a judge. As always, before we dive into a story with an ending that's going to feel really satisfying for you, let's do a quick roll call. Type present and the city you're watching from in the comments. For everyone who has liked and subscribed, I pray that Allah makes your problems easier, widens your provision, and keeps your body healthy. Thank you, my friends. Now, listen carefully to my story. My name is Furley, and when everything started, I honestly thought I was the luckiest woman I knew. I grew up in a small 2-bedroom house with parents who were always arguing about money. My dad jumped from job to job, my mom worked in a bakery, and investment was a word I only heard on TV. I promised myself that one day, I wouldn't live like that. I studied hard, worked 2 part-time jobs in college, and somehow managed to get into real estate. At first, it was just helping people rent apartments. Then I started learning how to spot undervalued houses, how to negotiate, how to talk to older men in suits who thought I was just some girl playing business. I kept my head down, saved every extra dollar, and slowly started buying small properties. One tiny condo, then another, then a beat-up duplex that everyone else thought was a terrible idea. By the time I was 32, I owned several properties under my own name. They weren't glamorous, but the rental income was stable. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering how to pay next month's bills. I could help my parents, I could travel a little, and I could breathe. That was around the time I met Rico. Rico wasn't like the men I'd met before. He was charming, funny, and he made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he talked to you. He worked in finance, of course he did, and he always seemed to know which restaurant had just opened, which bar had the best cocktails, which hotel had the best city view. He said he admired my independence, that he respected how I built my portfolio from nothing. "You're impressive, you know that," he told me once, twirling his glass of wine. "Most people just talk. You actually did it." I remember my cheeks getting warm. I wasn't used to hearing that. Rico came from a more established family. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Hampton, lived in a big house in the suburbs with white pillars and perfectly trimmed hedges. When he first took me there, I felt like I was walking into a magazine spread. The living room had those tall windows you see in movies, the kind that let in so much light you almost feel exposed. "We're very simple people," Mrs. Hampton said with a small smile as a housekeeper brought us coffee on a tray. "We just like things neat and in order." Simple was the last word I'd use for that house, but I smiled and nodded. I was nervous. I wanted them to like me, to see that I wasn't trying to use their son or climb into their world for free. I was proud that I could say, honestly, that I had my own assets. "So you own some properties?" Mr. Hampton asked, adjusting his glasses. "Yes, sir," I said. "A few small buildings and some condos. Mostly rentals." "That's cute," Mrs. Hampton replied, tilting her head. "Of course, it's different from the Hampton portfolio, but it's good that you're trying." The word cute stung, but I told myself I was being sensitive. Her smile was polite. Her voice was soft. Maybe that's just how she talked. Still, when we left that night, I couldn't help asking Rico, "Did your mom sound a little, I don't know, dismissive?" He laughed and kissed my forehead. "Babe, that's just how she talks. Don't overthink it. She liked you, trust me." I wanted to trust him. I always wanted to trust him. When we got married a year later, everyone said we were a power couple. I had my real estate, he had his financial background and family connections. We moved into a bigger house closer to his parents' neighborhood, halfway between my old life and his world of polished wood, quiet cars, and people who wore watches that cost more than my first apartment. The first odd feeling I got in that house came from something very small. One night, I came home earlier than usual and found Rico in the study with a man I didn't know. The door was slightly open. Papers were spread out on the desk, and I heard them talking in low voices. That signature will make everything much simpler down the line, the man said. He sounded confident, relaxed, like someone used to being obeyed. Trust me, Rico. Centralizing ownership now will save you a lot of trouble later. Rico's back was to me, but I saw him nod. She trusts me. She'll sign. I just have to pick the right moment. The man chuckled. Of course she trusts you. That's what marriage is about, isn't it? For a second, I just stood there, frozen in the hallway. I didn't understand what they were talking about, but my stomach tightened. Centralizing ownership. She'll sign. She trusts me. I knocked lightly on the door and pushed it open. Hey, I said, forcing a smile. I didn't know we had company. Rico turned around quickly, his expression changing into that familiar charming smile. Babe, you're home early. Come in. The man stood up and extended his hand. You must be Furley. I'm Daniel Reed, your attorney. My attorney. I shook his hand and tried to ignore the way his eyes scanned me, as if he was sizing me up. Nice to meet you, I said. I didn't know we had an attorney meeting today. It was just something small, Rico replied quickly. Boring paperwork stuff. I didn't want to bother you with it. Nothing to worry about, Daniel added smoothly. Just making sure everything is in order for your growing portfolio. You've built something impressive, Mrs. Hampton. The way he said, Mrs. Hampton, made my skin prickle. I hadn't changed my last name on all the documents yet. Most of my buildings were still under my maiden name. I laughed lightly, even though my heart was beating too fast. Well, as long as it's just boring paperwork. I let it go that night. I told myself I was tired, that I'd misunderstood. But the sentence I'd heard outside the door, she trusts me. She'll sign, stayed at the back of my mind like a small shadow. I didn't know it yet, but that was the first time my own house stopped feeling fully like mine. A few weeks later, Mrs. Hampton organized a family dinner at their place to celebrate the new chapter of our lives. Their dining room looked like something out of those glossy magazines that show perfect holiday spreads. The table was long and shiny, the plates heavy, the glasses thin and delicate. A chandelier hung above us, throwing a warm glow over polished silverware and carefully folded napkins. The whole Hampton clan was there. Rico's parents, his older sister Madison and her husband, his younger brother Luke and his girlfriend, and a couple of cousins whose names I could barely remember. I felt like I'd walked into a club I wasn't born to belong to. So, Madison said, twirling her fork between her fingers. I heard you're thinking of selling some of your properties, Furley? Yes, I said. I've been negotiating with a developer. The market's strong right now. It might be a good time to consolidate and move into bigger projects. Oh wow, Madison replied with an exaggerated smile. Look at you, talking like a big investor. Her husband chuckled. Hey, don't underestimate her. She's the one with the actual buildings. Mrs. Hampton dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin and gave me a look I couldn't quite read. Well, of course she has buildings, she said. But let's be realistic. Without Rico's guidance, those small projects would have hit a ceiling long ago. I felt my face get hot. I actually built most of my portfolio before I met Rico, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He's been helpful now, of course, but you didn't really know how far you could go until he came into the picture, she cut in smoothly. It's normal. Men are trained for these things. Women are good with details, feelings, that sort of thing. The table went quiet for a moment. I laughed weakly, waiting for Rico to say something, to defend me, to correct her. He just smiled and took a sip of his wine. Mom, don't start a gender war at dinner, he said lightly. We all know Furley's a hard worker. The way he phrased it made it sound like he was praising a diligent assistant, not a partner. My chest tightened. I didn't just work hard, I said. I took risks. I signed the loans. I dealt with tenants at midnight when pipes burst. I. Madison laughed. Relax, Fur, she said, shortening my name like we were close friends. Mom was just giving Rico some credit. You're so sensitive. Sensitive. That word. I felt something inside me curl up. I looked around the table. No one was really on my side. Their faces were polite, amused, distant. I suddenly felt like a child trying to prove I'd done something good, waiting for adults to say, "Well done," and pat my head. I just meant, I said quietly, that I'm not here riding on anyone's coattails. Mrs. Hampton smiled, but her eyes were cold. Of course you're not, dear. You married into this family because you love Rico, not because of anything else. We all know that. The implication hung in the air like smoke. That night, when we got home, I tried to bring it up with Rico. You really didn't hear how condescending your mom was? I asked as I took off my earrings in front of the mirror. She basically said I'm only anything because of you. Rico lay on the bed scrolling through his phone. You're overreacting, he said without looking up. That's just how she talks. Why do you always have to look for a problem? I'm not looking for a problem, I said, feeling a lump grow in my throat. I just want you to have my back. It hurt, Rico. He sighed and finally put his phone down. Furley, we just had a nice dinner. Everyone was relaxed, laughing, and then you choose to focus on one little comment. You know what that looks like. What? Drama, he said. You're making drama out of nothing. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Drama. Sensitive. Overreacting. I turned off the light without answering and slid into bed. He wrapped an arm around me like nothing had happened, and I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the dark ceiling. From that day, my name in that house didn't feel like my name anymore. Things got busier after that dinner. The developer I'd been talking to became more serious about buying several of my properties. It wasn't just a small deal. It was a huge one. They wanted to buy multiple buildings as a package, and the numbers they were talking about made my head spin. Tens of millions. I should have been over the moon. Instead, I felt off. Like there was a party happening with my name on the invitation, but I wasn't fully inside the room. We'll use Daniel for the sale, Rico said, sliding a folder across the kitchen table one morning. He's solid. My family's worked with him for years. I opened the folder. There were contracts, addendums, documents with long paragraphs that all blurred together. Selling real estate wasn't new to me, but this scale was. I read fast, trying to catch the important points. What's this line? I asked, tapping one paragraph. Authorization for representative to sign on behalf of owner. Rico leaned over, his coffee in hand. That just means Daniel can sign some documents for you when you're not available. Process moves faster. It's normal. I frowned. I've always signed my own papers. Babe, this is big time now, he said, smiling like I was being cute. You can't run around signing every little thing. Let the professionals handle it. You still have full control. Do I? I asked quietly. He laughed. Of course. Trust me, okay? Trust me. I stared at the paragraph again. The wording was vague, but I could feel the weight behind it. Authorizing someone else to sign in my name? I didn't like it. I want to talk to Daniel directly, I said. You will, Rico replied. We have a meeting at his office this afternoon. He'll explain everything, and you can ask your million questions. At the meeting, Daniel was all smooth smiles and reassuring tones. You've done very well with your investments, Mrs. Hampton, he said, sliding a pen between his fingers. This deal is going to take you to the next level. We're talking about serious figures here. I know, I said. That's why I want to make sure I'm not signing anything that gives away control. He chuckled softly. Of course. That's what I'm here for, to protect your interests. We went through the documents. He explained each page in a way that made things sound reasonable, boring even. Every time I raised a concern, he had an answer. That authorization clause, he said. It's standard. It just allows me to sign routine closing documents if you're busy or out of town. You'll still approve the major terms. Think of me as an extension of your hand, not a replacement for it. An extension of your hand. I wasn't fully convinced, but Rico squeezed my knee under the table and gave me a look that said, "Please, just go with this." I signed. A few days later, I received an email from Daniel's office with updated contracts. I opened the attachments and scrolled through. There was a lot of legal language, but something caught my eye, a line about previous ownership structure and reallocation under marital estate. My heart skipped. I scrolled back up and read more carefully. Wait. Had they changed something about how the properties were classified? It looked like the documents were referring to the buildings as part of shared marital assets managed under primary spouse authority. Primary spouse authority. Who was the primary spouse? I replied to the email. Hi, Daniel. Just checking, this paragraph about primary spouse authority. Can you clarify what that means exactly? Thanks. Furley. No answer that day. The next morning, I received a short reply. Hi, Furley. That's just standard language about how decisions are centralized for efficiency. Nothing to worry about. Best. Daniel. Nothing to worry about. Something inside me said, no, there is something to worry about. Before deleting the email, I printed the attachments. I also forwarded the whole set to a private email address I rarely used and saved them in a folder named Backups. It felt paranoid. It also felt necessary. I slid the printed documents into a plain manila folder and tucked it into the back of my closet, behind some winter clothes. At the time, I didn't fully understand how important that folder would become. I just knew that when people who made me feel small told me, "Don't worry," I needed something solid I could hold in my own hand. The more the deal moved forward, the stranger I felt in my own life. Whenever I asked about updates, I kept getting half answers. How's it going with the developer? I'd ask Rico at breakfast. Good, he'd say, spreading jam on toast. Daniel says everything's on track. You don't need to stress the details, babe. Just think about the big picture. 42 million is nothing to sneeze at. 42 million. Hearing that number out loud made my palms sweat. I'm not trying to stress, I said. I want to know what's happening with my own buildings. He gave me a look. Our buildings, he corrected. We're married, remember? I nodded slowly. Our buildings, I repeated. But you know I built them first, right? Before we got married. He rolled his eyes slightly. Are we really going to go down that road? You sound like you think I'm trying to steal from you. I didn't say that, I replied, even though the thought had started to creep into the corners of my mind. Then stop acting like it, he snapped. You're turning something exciting into a constant interrogation. Why can't you just be happy we're leveling up? Do you have to control every single detail? I flinched. I'm not trying to control everything. I sign things with my name. It's normal to want to know where my name is going. He laughed humorlessly. Your name, your buildings, you're this, you're that. Do you hear yourself? You make it sound like I'm some stranger living off you. You're my wife, Furley. We're supposed to be on the same team. But lately, it feels like you're looking for reasons to doubt me. His words twisted my insides. Was I making him feel distrusted? Was I overthinking everything because of my childhood fear of losing everything? I'm sorry, I said quietly. I don't want to make you feel that way. I've worked so hard to get here. It's scary. He sighed and reached across the table to hold my hand. I get that, he said softer now. But you have to stop letting your fear control you. You're seeing problems where there aren't any. It's all in your head. All in your head. Gaslighting doesn't always sound like a villain sneering. Sometimes it sounds like concern. Over the next weeks, every time I tried to ask more detailed questions, I got the same pattern. I'd say, "Can I see the latest update from the buyer?" "Rico, Daniel's handling it." I'd say, "Can we have a call together with Daniel so I can ask a few things?" "Rico, do you not trust me to speak for us?" I'd say, "I feel out of the loop." "Rico, because you choose to be. You're too emotional about this. Let the logical people handle it." Little by little, I stopped asking. When I tried to talk to my mom on the phone about my worries, she said, "Honey, maybe you're just nervous because it's a big amount. Trust your husband. He's educated. He knows this stuff. Don't cause problems in your marriage over money." When I tried to vent to my friend Zoe over coffee, I saw her glance at her watch. "Sorry, Fur," she said. "I have to run to a meeting." "You're probably overthinking it anyway. You always imagine worst-case scenarios. It's what made you so careful with your investments, remember?" Overthinking. Sensitive. Drama. The words circled my head like flies. One night, I overheard Rico talking to his sister Madison in the hallway. "She's been weird lately," he said. "Always questioning, always suspicious." "Well, she comes from a different background," Madison replied. "She's not used to big numbers. Maybe all this is too much for her brain." They both laughed quietly. I stood in the bedroom, my fingers gripping the edge of the dresser so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded in my ears. I wanted to storm out and scream, to say, "Too much for my brain? I built everything you're now trying to manage." Instead, I stayed where I was, silent, staring at my own reflection in the mirror. The woman in the glass looked tired, older, like she'd been slowly shrinking to fit inside a space that never really made room for her. I've never felt so alone in a house that full. The day everything cracked open started like any other, with my phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. I was making coffee when I saw the incoming call. It was from Daniel's office. "Hello." I answered, tucking the phone between my shoulder and my ear. "Good morning, Mrs. Hampton," a cheerful female voice said. "This is Linda from Daniel Reed's office. I'm calling to confirm the closing details." My heart skipped. "Closing?" I repeated. "As in, the sale is final?" "Yes," she said. "Congratulations. The properties have officially been sold. Funds are being processed as we speak. It's a big day." I leaned against the counter, my knees suddenly weak. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a brief pause as she checked something. "Total proceeds, $42 million, she said. "Minus fees and taxes, of course." $42 million. For a second, the kitchen blurred. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself. I didn't know we were closing today," I said. "Nobody told me the exact date." "Oh," Linda said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I thought you did. Mr. Reed has been coordinating closely with your husband. Maybe they wanted to surprise you." A surprise. I forced a laugh that didn't sound like me. "Right. Maybe they did. Thank you for calling." When the call ended, I just stood there, staring at my phone. My properties sold for $42 million. The words echoed in my head. For a few seconds, despite the unease, I felt a spark of the old excitement I used to feel when I closed a deal. I imagined calling my mom, telling her I'd done it. I imagined sitting down with Rico and planning what we'd do next, what we'd reinvest in, how we'd secure our future. I grabbed my keys and hurried to the car. I rushed home to tell my husband. The drive felt like a blur. My heart was pounding, my mind racing ahead to conversations we hadn't had yet. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw his car already there. Good. He was home. I walked up to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. That's when I heard my attorney's voice. "No, the funds are already being wired to the primary account," Daniel was saying. His voice was clear, carrying from the living room. Everything is under your control now. She doesn't have any standalone assets left. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorknob. Good, Rico replied. His tone was calm, almost casual. Last thing I need is for her to suddenly wake up and realize how much power she used to have. My throat went dry. You're sure she can't contest this? He asked. I don't want to deal with some messy fight later. As long as she signed what I prepared and you maintain the narrative, you're fine, Daniel said. You know how it goes. If she starts asking questions, you tell her she's being paranoid, that she doesn't understand how big deals work. People like her doubt themselves easily when everyone around them says they're overreacting. I felt my chest clench. People like her. My ears were ringing, but their words kept cutting through. And the 42 million? Rico asked. It's all going into the trust under my name? Into the marital trust you control, Daniel corrected. Same difference. Legally it's for both of you, practically. Well, you know. They both laughed. My vision tunneled. I realized my nails were digging into my palm so hard it hurt. Marital trust he controlled. No standalone assets for me. Narrative. Paranoid. The folder in my closet flashed through my mind, the printed contracts, the emails, the phrase, primary spouse authority. I thought about every time they'd told me I was being dramatic, every time they'd made me feel small, ungrateful, crazy. My whole body started trembling. I stepped back, trying not to make a sound. The house that used to feel at least half mine now felt like a trap built around me. For a second, I thought about storming into the living room and screaming, demanding answers, throwing their own words at them. But something in Daniel's tone made my blood run cold. Just remember what we talked about, he added. If she becomes a real problem, there are other ways to neutralize the situation. A small agreement, a controlled separation, maybe even making it look like she's the one who walked away. People will take your side if you play the wounded husband well enough. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. Neutralize the situation. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to rewrite the story of my life. A tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it. I needed both hands to hold on to myself, to keep from collapsing. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just in danger of losing my assets. I was in danger of losing my name, my reputation, and the story of who I was. I didn't walk into the living room that day. I quietly stepped back out of the house, closed the door without a sound, and sat in my car with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I understood something very clearly. If I confronted them right then, with nothing but my feelings and no plan, they would destroy me and call it helping. So I took a deep breath, started the engine, and drove away, not knowing where I was going. Only that, for the first time, I finally believed my own fear more than their voices. And I also knew this. Whatever I did next would decide whether I stayed a victim in their story, or became the one who wrote the ending. After selling her properties for 42 million, Furley accidentally overheard her husband Rico and their attorney Daniel talking. She found out they'd moved all the money into a trust he controlled, stripped her of standalone assets, and planned to call her paranoid if she ever questioned it. Instead of confronting them right away, she quietly left the house, shaking and terrified. I don't remember much about the drive after I left the house that day. I remember the sound of my own breathing, too loud in my ears. I remember a red light turning green while I just sat there until someone honked behind me. I remember my phone buzzing on the passenger seat, Rico's name flashing, and me staring at it like it belonged to someone else. I didn't pick up. Instead, I pulled into the parking lot of a small motel on the edge of town. The kind with chipped paint and a flickering sign. It was the opposite of everything the Hamptons had ever called home. For the first time in a long time, that felt safer. Inside my car, I finally let myself cry. I cried for the girl who had worked double shifts in college. I cried for the woman who'd spent nights dealing with tenant complaints, who'd negotiated with banks, who'd scraped for every building she'd bought. I cried for the idiot who signed papers because everyone in suits said, "Trust me." After a while, when the sobs turned into hiccups, I wiped my face, grabbed my phone, and opened my banking app. The numbers that stared back at me made my chest go cold. My personal accounts were almost empty. I clicked through the tabs, looking for any sign of the sale. Nothing. Then I saw a new section labeled Trust Accounts. I tapped it. There it was, a balance that made my eyes sting. 42 million. Underneath, in smaller letters, it said, Marital Trust, Primary Trustee, Rico Hampton. I tried to click, Transfer. A message popped up. You do not have permission to initiate transfers from this account. View only access. View only. I laughed. It sounded broken. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. Where are you? Rico's voice came through immediately, sharp and annoyed. Why did you leave the house like that? I got a call from Daniel's office, I said, skipping any greeting. My voice sounded flat, even to me. They told me the sale closed. 42 million. Did you think I wouldn't notice that the money went into a trust one can't touch? He exhaled loudly. Okay, first of all, calm down. Second, yes, the sale closed. This is why I didn't want you in the middle of it. You're too emotional about money. Too emotional. I repeated. I just saw my life's work parked in an account where I'm not allowed to move a single dollar without your say-so. The trust protects both of us, he said. It's standard. You don't understand how these things work. I understand that my name is on buildings that are gone, and my name is not on the money, I snapped. I understand that I heard you and Daniel talking about making sure I had no standalone assets. Silence. You were listening, he said finally. Yes, I said. I heard everything. For a moment, his voice changed. Softer, careful. Babe, you're misunderstanding, he said. You overheard one part of a conversation and now you're spinning it into some kind of betrayal. This is exactly what I mean when I say you create drama in your head. I heard Daniel say I don't have anything in my name anymore, I said. And you were happy about it. You're twisting it, he replied. He meant the properties are now consolidated under the trust. That's good. It simplifies taxes. It's for us. You're my wife. Why are you talking like we're opponents? Because you made sure I can't move my own money, I said. My voice cracked on the last word. You have view access, he said. What more do you want? Full access means you could panic and move money impulsively. I'm protecting our long-term future. That's what a responsible husband does. I closed my eyes. You're protecting yourself, I whispered. He sighed. Furley, listen to yourself. You sound unhinged. If you keep going down this road, you're going to push me into a corner. And if that happens, I can't promise this marriage survives. There it was. The threat. Maybe it shouldn't, I said. The words came out before I could stop them. They hung between us, shocking even me. You don't mean that, he said quickly. You're just overwhelmed. Go home. We'll talk. We'll have dinner with my parents. We'll explain the trust. Everyone can reassure you. You need calm voices around you, not your fear. Your parents. I repeated, a bitter smile touching my lips. The same people who think all my buildings were cute projects before you came along? They're rational, he snapped. Unlike this version of you. If you start running around telling people I stole from you, you're going to embarrass yourself. Nobody is going to believe that the woman who signed every document didn't understand what she was doing. I clenched my jaw. There it was again, the rewriting, the gaslighting, the threat of humiliation. I'm not coming home tonight, I said. Where are you? Safe, I said. That's all you need to know. He laughed, but there was an edge to it. You think some cheap motel means safe? You're my wife. Come home. For a second, his insistence almost pulled me back. Habit is a powerful chain. But then I remembered Daniel's voice saying, people like her doubt themselves easily. I'll talk to you when I'm ready, I said, and ended the call. I turned my phone off, booked a room at the motel, and walked inside carrying nothing but my purse and the weight of 10 years of sacrifice. That night, lying on a thin mattress under cheap sheets, I hit what felt like rock bottom. And while I stared at the cracked ceiling, one thought kept circling my mind. If they can twist paperwork, they can twist people's opinions, too. If I was going to fight this, I needed more than anger. I needed proof. I needed someone who was not theirs. I needed help. The next morning, I drove to my old house. Not the one with Rico, but the small duplex I'd bought years earlier, the first property that had really felt like mine. I had rented it out for a while, then kept one unit empty as a backup. A just-in-case place. I never thought, just in case, would actually happen. I unlocked the door and stepped into the dusty living room. Sunlight came through the blinds in thin lines. The air smelled like old paint and silence. It was small and a bit worn, but as I stood there, I felt grounded. This is mine, I whispered to myself. This is still mine. At least, I hoped so. I put my bag down and pulled out my phone again. This time, I turned it on and scrolled through my contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in years. Hey, Claire, I said when she answered. It's Furley. Fur. Her voice brightened with surprise. Oh my God, it's been forever. Are you okay? You sound off. I swallowed. I'm not okay, I admitted. You're still working at that law firm, right? The one that does civil cases. Yeah, she said slowly. Why? Did something happen? Yes, I said. Something big. I think my husband and his attorney just cleaned me out using contracts I didn't fully understand. And I need someone who's on my side for once. There was a pause. Come to my office, Claire said. Her voice had changed. The casual tone was gone. Today. Bring every document you have. And Fur. Don't talk to your husband again until you do. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Okay, I said. I'll be there. Before going to see her, I drove back to the house with Rico one last time. Not to talk. To collect. I parked a few houses down, heart racing, and walked around to the back. The housekeeper, Maria, was in the kitchen when I knocked on the back door. Mrs. Hampton, she said, surprised. Are you okay? Mr. Rico said you went to see your mother. I'm fine, I lied. I just need to grab some clothes. I'll be quick. Please don't tell him I was here yet, okay? She looked at my face for a second and something in her expression softened. Okay, she said quietly. I didn't see you. I went straight to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, threw in clothes, my laptop, some personal things. Then I went to the closet, pushed aside the winter coats, and pulled out the manila folder I'd hidden there. The papers felt heavier than their actual weight. I slid the folder into my bag and left the house the same way I'd come. By the time I sat in Claire's office a couple of hours later, with the folder and my laptop open on her desk, my nerves were frayed. Start from the beginning, she said. So I told her everything. I told her about meeting Rico. About his family. About the dinner where his mother called my buildings cute. About the conversations with Daniel, the authorization clause, the trust, the primary spouse authority line in the updated contracts. I showed her the printed emails. I showed her the earlier versions I'd forwarded to my hidden email. I showed her the bank app screenshot that said, view only. Claire listened carefully, taking notes. The more she read, the more her expression darkened. Okay, she said finally, leaning back. Here's what I see so far. You did sign an authorization allowing Daniel to sign on your behalf. That gives him some power. But, I asked, my heart in my throat. But the way they used that authorization looks shady, she said. These later documents are not just routine closing forms. They materially changed how your assets were classified, moving everything into a trust controlled by your husband, while reassuring you that nothing had really changed. That smells like manipulation at best. At worst, fraud. I swallowed. Can we do anything? We might, she said. We need more. I'm not a trust specialist, but I have a colleague who is. And another who loves forensic document work. We'll get them to look at the signatures, the dates, the version history. Contracts leave footprints, even when people think they're being clever. Rico's family has resources, I said quietly. Connections. What if everyone just takes their side? Claire's eyes met mine. Then we make it so it's not about sides, she said. We make it about facts. About dates, signatures, emails. The truth doesn't care how big their house is. I felt something inside me loosen. For months, I'd been told I was overreacting. Dramatic. Emotional. Now someone was finally saying, "You have a point." I exhaled shakily. Okay. What do I do? For now. Don't confront them directly, she said. Don't accuse them of anything on the phone, in texts, in email. Assume they'll collect every word you say and twist it. You keep it neutral. If they ask where you are, you say you're taking time to think. If they get aggressive, save every message. I nodded slowly. And, she added, tapping the manila folder, you keep backing up everything. Every email. Every document. Every screenshot. We'll need a full picture. What about the trust money? I asked. Can I get any of it back? That depends on what we find, she said honestly. But based on what I've seen, there's a real chance a court could decide you were misled, that your consent wasn't fully informed. Especially if we can show coordinated intent between your husband and his attorney. Coordinated intent, I repeated, tasting the words. You mean, they planned this together? She nodded slowly. Yes. And if we can prove that, the judge is not going to like it. For the first time since hearing Daniel's voice in my living room, I felt a small, steady flame of hope. It wasn't big or dramatic. It was just the quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy. Maybe I'd been right to be afraid. And now, finally, I had someone willing to look straight at what was happening instead of telling me to calm down. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. On the outside, everything looked like a slow-motion crash. Rico sent messages ranging from sweet to angry. Where are you? We need to talk. You're acting irrational. My parents are worried about you. If you don't come home, I'm going to have to consult my own lawyer about this. I responded in short, neutral sentences. Exactly how Claire told me. I need time. I am safe. I will communicate through my attorney from now on. The moment I typed that last one, his tone changed. You got a lawyer? For what? To sue your own husband. You're making a huge mistake, Fur. Maybe I was. But this time, I preferred my mistake to their protection. Inside my small duplex, I built a new temporary routine. I slept on a second-hand mattress. I cooked simple food. I opened my laptop every morning, answered emails from Claire and her colleagues, and forwarded every snippet of information I could dig up. Claire introduced me to her co-worker, Eric Carter, an older attorney with kind eyes and a sharp mind for complicated financial structures. He spread the documents across a conference table one afternoon, adjusting his glasses as he read. This clause, he murmured, tapping one page. And this change here. And this date stamp. I watched him like my life depended on his opinion. Because in a way it did. After an hour, he sat back and steepled his fingers. Mrs. Hampton, he said slowly, if what you're telling us about the conversations you had is accurate, this doesn't look good for your husband and his attorney. In what way? I asked. A judge might use words like breach of fiduciary duty, misrepresentation, And conflict of interest, kind of way, he said. Your attorney was supposed to protect your interests. Instead, he seems to have structured everything to favor your husband while keeping you in the dark. So what do we do? I asked. We document everything, he said. We bring in a forensic expert to examine the signatures and metadata. We look for evidence that changes were made after you signed. And we consider filing formal complaints, both civil and ethical. Ethical? I repeated. With the bar, he said. Lawyers are held to certain standards. If Daniel Reed helped your husband strip you of independent control over assets you built, without full disclosure, he may have a problem much bigger than you. The image of Daniel's slick smile flashed in my mind. I liked the idea of him finally being scared. In between meetings and document reviews, I picked up a part-time job helping a small property management office in a different neighborhood. The pay wasn't glamorous, but it gave me something to do besides obsess over what the Hamptons were saying about me. The owner, Mrs. Wilson, was an older woman with a straightforward manner and a soft heart. You've got a good head for this, she said one afternoon as we went through tenant applications. Don't let some man convince you your brain doesn't work just because he's taller and louder. I laughed, surprised at how much I needed to hear that. How did you know that's what happened? I asked. She shrugged. Because I've seen it. For 40 years. Different names, same script. At night, in my small bedroom, I started to breathe a little easier. I still woke up sometimes with my heart racing, dreaming that Rico had found me, that he'd dragged me back to that big house and convinced everyone I'd lost my mind. But each time I'd open my eyes, see the cracked ceiling of my own little place, and remember, I wasn't there anymore. I was here. And here, slowly, my spine was growing back. For the first time, I realized the broken one was not me. It was the way they looked at me. As the evidence piled up, Claire and Eric called me in for a longer meeting. They'd spread everything on the table. My earlier contracts, the updated ones, the emails, the bank records we'd requested under my name. There's a pattern, Eric said, pointing from one document to another. Here, you sign a broad authorization. Shortly after, Daniel files trust documents reclassifying your separate properties as marital assets. Then he drafts sale contracts where he signs on your behalf. The funds go straight into a trust with your husband as primary trustee. All the while, you're given vague reassurances and kept away from specific details. It's like a funnel, Claire added. Everything you built got funneled into a structure he controls, under the guidance of a lawyer who was supposed to be neutral but clearly wasn't. My stomach twisted. So, what now? Now we stop being silent, Claire said. But we don't shout into the void. We file. They had already prepared drafts. One was a civil complaint against Rico and Daniel, alleging fraud, undue influence, and misrepresentation. Another was an ethics complaint against Daniel to the professional board that oversaw lawyers in our state. Reading my own story in those formal words felt surreal. I wasn't just overreacting anymore. I was a plaintiff. Filing these is serious, Eric said. Rico will probably retaliate. Smear campaigns, accusations. She's crazy, she's unstable, she's greedy. You need to be ready for that. I nodded. He already started, honestly. He's been texting my mom saying I'm not myself. That I'm listening to outsiders, trying to destroy our marriage. Claire snorted. Of course he is. What about the money? I asked quietly. Is there any chance? I mean, am I ever getting any control back? If the court agrees you were misled, yes, Eric said. At minimum, we can ask for the trust structure to be reviewed. Best case, some of these transfers could be undone or reallocated. And if there's evidence of intentional wrongdoing, the court can get creative about remedies. Intentional wrongdoing, I echoed. You mean, they did it on purpose? He met my eyes. That's what we're going to argue. I took a deep breath and picked up the pen. Signing my name on those complaints felt different from signing those old contracts. Back then, I'd been half blind, trusting. This time, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was choosing to fight. You're not alone in this anymore, Claire said softly. Remember that. A week after we filed, something unexpected happened. Linda, the assistant from Daniel's office, asked to meet. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. She looked nervous, glancing around before she spoke. I could get in trouble for this, she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. But I needed you to know, you're not crazy. What they did to you, it wasn't fair. My heart sped up. What do you mean? I asked. She took a deep breath. I was in the room for some of those meetings, she said. I heard how Daniel and Mr. Hampton talked about you. They said things like, she's easier to manage if she thinks this is all normal. And, as long as we keep using the word joint, she won't ask for details. I swallowed. Did Daniel ever talk about changing documents after I signed them? She hesitated, then nodded. He had me print updated pages, she said. Ones that changed how the trust worked. I asked him if we needed you to sign again and he said, no, the authorization covers it. She doesn't need to see every tweak. She'd just get emotional. Emotional. The word made my hands curl into fists. Would you be willing to testify? I asked. Her eyes widened. I could lose my job. You could lose a lot more if you stay tied to someone who might lose his license, I said gently. But I understand if you're scared. She was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she whispered, if it goes to court, I'll tell the truth. Her words felt like someone had just put another brick on my side of the scale. Later, Claire almost hugged me when she heard. A witness inside his office? That's gold, she said. It shows what we've been saying. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. We added Linda's potential testimony to our list of evidence. Meanwhile, the ethics board opened a preliminary investigation into Daniel's conduct. They requested documents. They asked questions. For once, he was the one who had to explain himself on paper. Eventually, the court set a date. There would be a hearing to determine whether the trust and sale structures were enforceable as they stood, or whether they were tainted enough to justify reopening everything. When Claire emailed me the date, my hands shook as I read it. The day is coming, she wrote. Get ready. I stared at the screen for a long time. The girl who used to cry quietly in a guest bathroom after Mrs. Hampton's comments was gone. The woman reading that email may have been scared. But she wasn't going to run. On the morning of the hearing, I stood in front of my small mirror, adjusting the collar of my simple blouse. No designer label. No flashy jewelry. Just me. I tied my hair back, took a deep breath, and looked myself in the eye. You are not crazy, I told my reflection. You are not ungrateful. You are not overreacting. You are someone who built something real and got tricked. And today, you're going to tell the truth about it. When I arrived at the courthouse, Claire and Eric were waiting outside. You ready? Claire asked. No, I admitted. But let's go anyway. Inside, the hallway smelled like old wood and paper. People in suits moved back and forth, carrying folders, talking in low voices. It felt like a different planet from the Hampton living room, but the stakes were higher here. We entered the courtroom. Rico was already there, sitting at a table with his own attorney, a sleek woman in a navy suit. His parents sat behind him. Mrs. Hampton's lips were pressed tightly together, her eyes cold. Mr. Hampton looked like someone who'd rather be golfing. Daniel sat at the same table. His usual confidence dimmed. He adjusted his tie, his jaw tight. When Rico saw me, he frowned. For a brief second, I saw something like hurt in his eyes. But then it hardening into something else. Annoyance, maybe, or anger at losing control. I sat at the other table with Claire and Eric. As the judge entered and everyone stood, I felt the weight of years land on my shoulders. But for once, I wasn't collapsing under it. I was standing. The hearing started with the basics. Eric presented an overview of what had happened. My original ownership of the properties, the marriage, the broad authorization I signed, the shift into the marital trust controlled by Rico, the sale, the limited access. Then came the detailed work. Document by document, email by email, he walked the judge through the timeline. This is the authorization she signed, Eric said, holding up one paper. And this is the trust document drafted shortly after, without her presence, which reclassified all her separate properties as marital assets under a structure she had no meaningful control over. He pointed to another page. Here, the sale contracts assigning power to Mr. Reed to sign on her behalf. And here, the bank confirmation showing the $42 million in proceeds moving directly into a trust account where she has view-only access. Rico's attorney countered with words like efficiency, standard structure, and mutual benefit. Mrs. Hampton was fully aware she was centralizing her assets for estate planning purposes, she said. Just because the market changed or emotions arose later doesn't make a good faith structure somehow fraudulent. Then came the part I'd been dreading and waiting for in equal measure. I was called to testify. I walked to the witness stand, my knees slightly weak. The clerk swore me in. My voice shook a little when I promised to tell the truth, but I meant every word. Eric started gently. Can you tell the court, in your own words, how you built your real estate portfolio? He asked. I talked about my jobs in college. My first small condo. The duplex. The late-night repairs, the negotiations, the fear every time I signed a loan, and the relief every time a deal worked. I saw a slight shift in the judge's expression. Understanding, maybe. Then we moved into the harder parts. Did you understand that by signing the later documents, you were giving up independent control over your assets? Eric asked. No, I said firmly. I was told everything was for our benefit. I was reassured constantly that nothing important was changing. I asked questions and was told I was overthinking, that I was too emotional to understand big deals. Rico's attorney tried to rattle me on cross-examination. Isn't it true that you signed every document voluntarily? She asked. I signed them because my husband and his attorney told me they were routine, I said. They minimized my questions. They used technical language and made me feel stupid when I asked for clarification. Do you have any proof they did that? She asked. Yes, I said. Some of it is in the emails. Some of it is in witnesses. That was when Linda was called. She walked in, looking nervous, but when she took the stand, her voice was steady. Mr. Reed and Mr. Hampton discussed Mrs. Hampton as someone who needed to be managed, she said. They deliberately told me not to copy her on certain emails. I heard Mr. Reed say, as long as we keep talking about this as a joint benefit, she won't look deeper. Rico's attorney tried to undermine her. You were just an assistant, correct? Isn't it possible you misunderstood? I know the difference between updating someone and hiding things from them, Linda replied quietly. And I know when a client is being kept in the dark. Finally, Eric played an audio recording. I had almost forgotten about it in all the chaos. The day after I'd heard Daniel and Rico talking in the living room, I had gone back with my phone recording in my pocket, pretending I wanted to understand the trust better. They'd repeated much of what I'd first overheard, confident in their power. On the speakers in the courtroom, Daniel's voice echoed. You really thought those properties were still yours after you signed everything over to Rico, Furley? From today on, you don't have a single asset left in your name. I watched the judge's face harden. On the recording, my own voice was shaky. I thought this was for both of us, I said. It is, Daniel replied. Legally, technically. But control has to be centralized. You'll thank us later when you're not stressing every little thing. In the courtroom, his hands were now clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. For the record, Eric said, this conversation took place in Mrs. Hampton's living room, after she had already signed key documents. The tone you heard is not neutral advice. It's mockery. The judge looked over his glasses at Daniel. Mr. Reed, he said slowly, do you deny that this is your voice? Daniel's mouth opened and closed. No, Your Honor, he said finally. But the recording is out of context. I was trying to reassure her by telling her she had no assets in her name. The judge asked. Silence. I glanced at Rico. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked small. He wasn't the confident man in the nice suit who knew every restaurant. He was just a man who had been caught under a light he couldn't dim. His parents looked pale. Mrs. Hampton gripped her husband's arm, her lips moving in what looked like a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell. After hours of testimony, arguments, and documents, the judge called a short recess. When we returned, he gave his preliminary ruling. Based on the evidence, he said, it appears that Mrs. Hampton's consent to the current trust and sale structure may have been obtained through incomplete disclosure and undue influence. Daniel's face went even whiter. The court is therefore ordering the following, the judge continued. 1. The trust is to be frozen. No further distributions or transfers will be made without court approval. 2. An independent trustee will be appointed in place of Mr. Hampton. 3. The underlying transactions will be subject to further review to determine whether they should be unwound in whole or in part. 4. This matter is being referred to the appropriate disciplinary body for review of Mr. Reed's conduct. I heard someone gasp behind me. My eyes stung. The judge wasn't done. Let me be clear, he said, looking from Rico to Daniel. Marriage is not a license to quietly erase a partner's independent financial existence. Legal expertise is not a weapon you get to use to confuse the very people you are supposed to advise. His words landed like stones. For a moment, the whole room was silent. Then he adjourned. I stood up slowly. My legs felt like they were made of something soft and new. Daniel's hands were shaking as he gathered his papers. Rico stared straight ahead, jaw tight. His parents avoided looking at me. Claire squeezed my arm. We're not done, she whispered. But this is huge. As we walked out of the courtroom, I glanced back one last time. For years, I'd sat in rooms where my opinion felt small and their words felt like law. Today, for the first time, the truth stood right in the middle of all of us. And they couldn't run from it anymore. The months after the hearing were a different kind of long. There were more meetings, more documents, more negotiations. The independent trustee appointed by the court went through everything with a fine-toothed comb. In the end, to avoid dragging things out into a full trial that could damage them even more publicly, Rico and his family pushed for a settlement. Are you okay with settling? Claire asked me in one meeting. We have a strong case, but litigation is exhausting. This offer isn't perfect, but it's substantial. I looked at the numbers. A significant portion of the $42 million would be returned to an account under my sole name, acknowledged as compensation for the assets I'd originally brought into the marriage and the way I was misled. The remaining portion would stay in the trust, but under a new structure where I had equal control, or if I preferred, could exchange it for a clean break. Can we attach conditions? I asked. About them not talking about me, not smearing me. Yes, Eric said. We can make confidentiality and non-disparagement part of it. And what about Daniel? I asked. Does he just walk away? Claire shook her head. The disciplinary board is handling him, she said. Regardless of the settlement, they saw the recording, the emails, the testimony. You won't control that outcome. His license may not survive this. I thought about his smirk in my living room. The way he'd said, you really thought those properties were still yours. I didn't need to see his sentence. Knowing he'd have to explain himself to people who understood exactly what he'd done was enough. And Rico? I asked quietly. That's up to you, Claire said gently. Do you want to stay married to him? The question felt almost absurd. The girl who had once believed they were a power couple was gone. The woman sitting at that table had watched him stay silent while an attorney bragged about erasing her. I want out, I said. I want a divorce. I want my name separate from his on every possible document. We added that to the settlement. Later, standing in a quiet room at the courthouse again, I signed the final papers. Some of them transferred funds back into my control. Some finalized the new structure. Some ended my marriage. As I signed the last page, I felt something loosen deep in my chest. It wasn't joy. Not yet. It was relief. Outside the building, the air felt different. I wasn't going back to the big house with the tall windows. I wasn't going back to dinners where my buildings were called cute. I wasn't going back to conversations where every worry I expressed was labeled drama. I didn't have all 42 million. Legal fees, taxes, and time had taken their bite. But I had more than I'd ever started with. Most importantly, this time, it was under my name only. No primary spouse authority. Just me. A year later, my life looked nothing like what I'd imagined when I said, I do, to Rico. I lived in a medium-sized house in a quieter neighborhood. Not flashy, not tiny. Just comfortable. The kind of place where I knew every corner, because I'd picked it myself. I rebuilt a portfolio. Smaller, more careful, more secure. I invested in buildings under structures that made sense to me, with attorneys I chose after getting second opinions. I made it a rule to always ask questions until I understood. And if anyone made me feel stupid for doing that, I walked away. Sometimes I met women through Mrs. Wilson's property network who were going through their own financial storms. We'd sit at her office or at a cafe and they'd say things like, maybe I'm overreacting, but, and my husband says I'm being dramatic about money. Every time, I'd feel a familiar ache in my chest. You're not crazy for wanting clarity, I'd tell them. You're not dramatic for wanting your name to mean something on paper. If someone is scared of you understanding the details, ask yourself why. As for Rico and his family, they faded into the background of my life. He lost a lot more than money. Once the story of what happened came out in certain circles, carefully, without details that broke our agreement, people started viewing him differently. He had trouble getting clients who trusted him with their finances. The image of the flawless Hampton son cracked. His parents avoided most social events for a while. When they did go, people whispered. Last I heard, they'd downsized their house. A small part of me wondered if Mrs. Hampton ever thought about the girl she once called cute for owning buildings on her own. I didn't wish them harm. But I also didn't waste my time wishing them well. They had to live with what they did. That was enough. As for Daniel, he eventually disappeared from the firm's website. Rumors said he'd had to surrender his license after the disciplinary board finished their investigation. Whenever I passed by the courthouse, I remembered that day when his hands shook under the judge's stare. The man who once joked about me having nothing in my name now had to sign his own name on documents that explained his behavior. There's a certain poetry in that. One evening, as the sun set behind the houses in my new street, I sat on my porch with a mug of tea and looked at the life around me. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. No one was going to tell me again that my assets weren't really mine. No one was going to convince me that asking questions made me less of a partner. I'd learned the hard way that love without respect is just a nice word painted over control. I took a deep breath and smiled. Now I know, I said softly to myself. I was never really worthless. I was just stuck in a house that refused to see my value. And once I walked out of that house, they couldn't sell my worth behind my back ever again. From everything I went through, I learned that signing your name doesn't mean much if you're too scared to ask what you're signing for. The people who truly care about you will want you to understand, not stay confused and quiet. If you're in a situation like mine back then, please remember, you're not dramatic for wanting clarity, and you're not ungrateful for wanting your own name to matter on paper. If you've ever gone through something similar or you want to share your own story, write it in the comments below. Don't forget to share this story with your friends, like the video, and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories.